Assalamu alaikum. This is Shazil Malik from Pakistan Policy Network. We are continuing our conversation with Dr. Shireen Mazari. Do you think you found this when you guys first started the government in KPK? I know there was a lot of hope of getting foreign investment for the province itself, raising money externally through capital markets. Were you guys able to achieve this, or do you think your hands are tied being a provincial government?
I think our hands were tied to a large extent because we were a provincial government, because the federal government was not giving us our fair share, was not giving us access, in fact, was impeding our appeal for foreign investment, which was really unfortunate because at the end of the day, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is as much a part of Pakistan as, say, Punjab is or Sindh is. But nevertheless, we were able to implement a number of our social welfare programs. For example, health and education, we were able to improve tremendously. And we met a lot of local resistance from this entrenched stakeholders like the old doctors and so on in the health sector. But finally, a bit late, but we did manage to move and reform the health sector. The biggest reform that was required by the ordinary person was reform of the police, and I think that has been a major success of PTI in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, depoliticization and professionalization of the police service. And then again, in Pakistan, I think for the first time, a political party actually gave importance to and implemented environment friendly policies. The billion tree tsunami has been acknowledged as a successful policy even internationally. So if you look at
Absolutely.
Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, yes, we were not able to achieve all that we would like to. We got started late because remember, this was our first time in government, but more than that, we came into power with old structures of bureaucracy and bureaucratic inertia and set ways of bureaucracy. That has been a big stumbling block. So it took us time to overcome that, to in fact reform the bureaucracy so that the bureaucracy would also be able to think progressively. So that's why it has taken us time. We have learnt also from our experience what we should do and how we should go about things, and what are the mistakes that we should not be making, which we may have made in the initial days in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
Right. So now that you have a head start, so let's say again, we're being presumptuous by saying that you guys come into power in 2018. I would like to dive deeper into the social sectors that you've spoken about, particularly education and health. The focus on education in the past 70 years, we have either been shooting for MDGs and SDGs as set by the UN, rather than looking at what needs to be done on the ground and what are the changes which are very Pakistan specific. How do you plan, or is there a plan to be able to change that?
Yes, there is. I think our focus is going to be from primary school level up. If the
Mm.
nurseries that are going to feed higher education are not reformed, you're not going to get improved educational standards. So you have to begin from the bottom up. And we also, our focus is going to be reforming the syllabi in all the government schools and mainstreaming of the madrasas. The madrasas have children who are just neglected. Not every madrasa is a radical madrasa, and I can speak on this at least vis-a-vis Punjab with confidence because I have done research in three districts of Pakistan: Rahimyar Khan, Rajanpur, and Gigi Khan. And I can tell you, I have a list of all the madrasas there and who
Right.
funds them, what they're like, except for 6 or 7 madrasas, which you may call radical, which by the way are very well equipped also with laboratories and libraries and computers. Every other madrasa just has 1 or 2 teachers and about 200 students just being thrown there by their parents so they get a decent meal. What you need to do is to upgrade these madrasas, bring them into the mainstream of education. And frankly, because the state resources are limited, I have been discussing this with Mr. Imran Khan, and when we have more time after the elections, we are going to discuss this more. My proposal, and a number of people, leaders in our party agree with it, is we should have a private public partnership. One suggestion is that wherever, for example, in South Punjab, there are a lot of big industrial enterprises, whether it's for the
Right.
fertilizer, the fertilizer factories, the sugar mills, so on. They should adopt these madrasas, invest in upgrading their facilities, and then provide apprenticeships for these people in their factories, and they should be given tax breaks. So, there are a
Right.
number of these proposals where you involve the private sector because we know we have limited resources. But the focus will be on upgrading of government schools and mainstreaming and upgrading of the madrasas and a massive syllabi reform.
Do you think adding vocational training to this can also help?
As I suggested, that's why that if you do a public-private partnership with industry, then the vocational training will be in the form of apprenticeships. But we should also
Right.
have what in England, I don't know what they're called now, the polytechnic, that not everybody needs to go to a university to do social sciences, have proper polytechnics where you teach the trades. So
Right.
across the board, we have to fix up the education system so that we don't have two streams of education: the private sector, where the rich get educated and therefore jobs go to them, they have opportunities, and the public sector, where you're really not giving any opportunities to those who are coming out of these. We have to reform the public sector school system, and that has to include the madrasas. We cannot ignore the madrasas and the children who are there.
I agree with you, and I actually find it very surprising when there is flack given anytime there's a talk about either giving money to the madrasas or mainstreaming them or any sort of madrasa reforms. And ironically, the flack comes from both the religious right and the liberal left. It's one of the few things they agree upon.
There are many things they agree upon, both extremes. But the problem is that obviously the right wing, the religious right, will not want their sort of what they feel is their. It belongs to them. The madrasas are their entity. Why should the state interfere? This is absolute nonsense. We have to mainstream all public sector education and the madrasas. You cannot
Absolutely.
have people who are living in abject poverty, who are actually not being educated, and yet you're saying they're in a madrasa. And of course, the left has different issues. Um, you know, the left has to realize that Pakistan is an Islamic state, and our commitment is, and even Jinnah's commitment, if you read his speeches, was to an Islamic welfare state. And that is the pattern that we are committed to. We are not a secular state, although a lot of European states who say they're secular are not exactly secular. In Britain, the Queen has to be head of the Church of England. So, how secular
Right.
is Britain? So, I mean,
Right.
that they're different things. But the fact of the matter is, the left has to realize what the ground realities of Pakistan are and how we need to improve the lot of our people taking cognizance of those ground realities. You can't live in
Right.
an airy fairy world which doesn't exist on the ground.
How do we, instead of telling people this is not what you can do or this is not what you should do or you have to understand the ground realities, how do we bring these two extreme, this polarization, how do we bring it to them to the table and find some sort of a consensus? Do you not think that's important? Because
I think,
otherwise, sorry, go ahead, please.
well, it's important. It's important in the sense that it's always good to have consensus, but in no society do you have a complete consensus. There'll always be the fringes. In your society, you have them, we have them in ours. The idea is to reduce the numbers who are on the extremes, to by and large get the majority of people to agree with your plan. And if people are not foolish, if they see that it's for their betterment, why would they not support it? I mean, Pakistanis are rational people. Pakistanis are, by the way, highly aware politically. They know now what their rights are. And I think if they see that somebody is working for their betterment, they will be more than willing to support that policy.
Right. So with that policy, I would like to talk about the FATA reforms and the merger of FATA into KPK. Now, there were people who were against it, and I believe they are still against it, and they are doing everything they can to stop this merger. Um, what do you have to say about that?
Well, we were in the forefront of the merger. We supported it. I personally was involved in the drafting of the bill that eventually was presented to Parliament. And I think the people, it's very ironic. From the extreme left and the extreme right, you have objections. And the two main political leaders who have objected is Maulana Fazlur Rahman and Mahmood Achakzai. And it's purely for their own self-preservation and self-interest because they know they will lose out politically in terms of elections and votes. But the fact of the matter is, this was a colonial remnant and Pakistan had to get rid of it. Already we have spent too many years treating FATA as a colonial legacy ruled by FCR, which was a draconian colonial law. So I think the merger, by the way, it has happened. The president has signed it. It has now become law. And I think, yes, there are wrinkles, they have to be ironed out. There are a lot of dangers that we need to be aware of. But the fact is, for the first time, all the tribal areas, the provincial tribal regions plus FATA have all been mainstreamed.
One thing that is really important that was brought forward by citizens from Mohammed agencies and that I had spoken to, they were concerned that because of this change in law, they have seen the crime rate has started to go up, because I believe some of the districts of Mohammed agency became part of KPK long before this merger was signed. And they've seen the crime rate shoot up, and they are of concern that this is something permanent because of the lack of justice system or the poor judicial system that we have.
The new law that is the new regulations that have come, which are going to be part of which will be the laws that will eventually help the merger be completed. They have alternate dispute resolution. So the old structures of the Jirga have not been removed, but the Supreme Court of Pakistan and the Peshawar High Court writ will now extend to all the tribal areas because now they're part of KP. And the other thing is that the political agent and the power that he held, which was a big bone of contention, has
Right.
ended, because now there will be magistrates sitting there. And yes, for a while you may find an upsurge in the crime rate as the traditional structures of society are disrupted, although they've already been disrupted. But at the end of the day, over a period of time, the structures of the High Court and the Supreme Court will allow people to get justice, and they won't have to go all the way from their areas to Islamabad or somewhere else. And the other thing
Right.
is that for the first time, the people of FATA will be electing their own representatives. One person, one vote. Women will vote. And that is why some of the FATA MNAs were very reluctant initially. They wanted that their privilege of the 12 seats in the National Assembly should be retained
Right.
for 10 years. But that was not possible at all. It has to be mainstream. They will retain their seats in the general election 2018, but after that, the people of that area will vote for their representatives directly, one person, one vote.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheen, for your time. It was a very enlightening conversation. I hope that we do continue to speak. I wish you best of luck for the upcoming elections. And I hope that everyone across the country are hoping for a progressive Pakistan going forward. Thank you so much for being with us.